So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Accomplices for Justice. Thank you all for joining us today, either on Facebook or here on Zoom. I am Jonathan Freirish. I am a rabbi in Buffalo and co-facilitator of Accomplices for Justice and the founder and director of something called Open Door Judaism, which sponsors this. And I am so honored and privileged and blessed to be joined today by two amazing people, my normal co-facilitator and accomplice in committing anti-racism, Reverend Dr. Wiley Hughes, who is the senior pastor at Orchard Park Presbyterian Church and the first African-American pastor at Orchard Park Presbyterian, and a scholar in his own right. And joining us as a special guest today is someone that I am thrilled to have with us, Dr. Jennifer Roberts. And Dr. Roberts is an active living health equity and truth-telling scholar who draws on history to expose, understand, and dismantle the health disparities and social injustices that marginalized populations and communities of color endured over generations. Her lived experience and observation of racialization have embodied and informed her approach to scientific discovery and ultimately to her quest for an anti-racist society where the basic human rights of health, equity, and justice are no longer denied. I thank you so much, Dr. Roberts, for joining us. We were just reviewing some of the articles you wrote. I encountered you first in your presentation to the East Side Parkway Coalition that was actually Zoomcast into a room at the Saturn Club, for those of you who don't know the Saturn Club here in Buffalo being turned towards the anti-racist, anti-development agenda that Dr. Roberts was talking about with regard to Route 33, the Kensington Expressway through the east side of Buffalo, is a very interesting development in the history of Buffalo. Because the Saturn Club, while often identified as the alternate high-end club because it admitted women when the Buffalo Club wouldn't, and a number of other things, it's not exactly a bastion of anti-racism. So encountering you there first, Dr. Roberts, was wonderful. So we're gonna let you talk for a while. For those of you who've not been in our meetings, we start with about 45 to 50 minutes of us talking, and if you have any questions, feel free to pose them in the chat, and then we'll invite people to come off video and off on mic if you like to ask questions in our last bit. So, Dr. Roberts, tell us a little bit about this whole East Side Parkway Coalition and what's going on with the Kensington Expressway and its history here in Buffalo, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rabbi Jonathan. Thank you for having me here. I'm really just so excited to be here, and same thing with you, Pastor Wiley. I'm excited to meet you and just to have this little chat with you all about something that is near and dear to my heart. Well, I actually got involved with the East Side Parkways Coalition kind of a little bit happenstance. I'm actually writing a book titled Buffalo's Emerald Necklace: How Environmental Racism Devastated a Community and Destroyed an Olmsted Treasure. And during my sabbatical, I was doing some research and I came across East Side Parkways Coalition. And they are pretty much a grassroots community organization that started kind of very organically. And I was just deciding to attend one of their meetings. And in essence, they are fighting against the proposed tunnel. So DOT is proposing a tunnel as a solution to the aging Kensington highway infrastructure, and as a way, I guess, in their mind to remedy past transit transgressions. So their proposition is to cap a portion of the tunnel between Sydney and Bass Street. So that's roughly 3/4 of a mile. And when they cap it, it will create this tunnel. And then on top of that cap, they'll put some grass and trees and some other greenery to almost mimic, I guess, what was there at one point. But we're fighting against this proposition. Again, this proposition will be north of $1 billion in cost, not to mention the annual cost that I think is 5 million or might be 50 million. I've heard it's a million something. It's just annual cost. Um, and so we're fighting to say, well, you know what? Why don't we just get rid of this highway and do a full restoration of Humboldt Parkway, or at least try to replicate what was there, which was this 2 mile long green space that connected the two anchor parks of MLK Junior Park and Delaware Park. And it would be so beneficial because first, we don't have the vehicular demand that would have warranted such a highway in its heyday when it first was put in full operation, which was roughly like 1971, when it was, I think, fully completed. And at that point, the population was, I'm not going to say double, but I think Buffalo's now around 280, 290, and I think it was reaching 600,000 at that point, at least in the high 500s. And they thought it was going to continue to grow. So they thought, we need to be equipped with such a expressway. But literally, almost the time it was completed, the population started to decline for a myriad of reasons. So at the population that we have now, we just don't have that vehicular demand. Second, we don't even have like really that interest with the younger generation. Like these younger generation, I don't remember what letter we're on, Generation Z, D, I don't know, the youngest generation. They want to walk everywhere. They really don't want to use a car. If they do, they want to Uber, they want to Lyft. They don't necessarily want the burden of a personal vehicle. So if we're trying to attract that generation, which we're always trying to say, well, why are all young people leaving Buffalo? They come here to go to grad school, medical school, law school, and then they leave. Well, that would be a perfect way to attract them if we had some kind of focus where we said, hey, let's invest in light rail. So those are a couple, I think, uh, reasons why I would say we don't need the highway, along with the fact that if you do book this tunnel, which DOT is proposing, when I say DOT, New York State DOT specifically, um, out of the portal ends of the tunnel, you will have an increase in air pollution. So already the ambient air pollution is already elevated because you already have these tailpipe emissions coming out as a result of just the traffic on the 33 as it is. But when you have this tunnel and you have like the ingress and egress of people trying to get in the tunnel, you will have this increase. And so you'll have these larger plumes of air pollution. And one in particular, particulate matter 2.5, which is one of the really nasty ones, among other ones. It's really a definitely contributor to either developing asthma or exacerbating existing asthma. So that's a main negative. And also downstream of some of those plumes, you have some growing bodies, particularly you have nursery schools, you have other childcare providers, and you have some actual elementary schools. So that's another reason. So those are just a couple of reasons why, we don't really need this. And it would be wonderful on the converse to have 2 miles length approximately of green space, and then you put those trees back. And this would remedy another issue that is plagued on the east side, which is a green space inequity. So when you look at the east side compared to the west side, there's definitely an inequity in terms of the number of street lined trees, just the number of green space in general. And people may say, oh, that's okay, whatever. But greenery in nature is not just a nice to have. It's something that we need to have. That is what brings down the temperature, especially on these hot days. And Buffalo, the temperature just creeps up a little bit, even though we're supposed to be a climate crisis refuge, which we will be probably because we're not near these, we're not at risk for the impacts of the ocean, the sea level increase. But we still see that the temperature is increasing. Houses that at one point were never thought of having AC now are starting to be like, wait a minute, I think I need,
Mm.
air conditioning. But in any case, if you had more greenery, it would make this area much cooler, and it would offset the impact of having all that extension of that impervious surface, which actually makes the area hotter. Also, with nature, you have a variety, I won't get into it, but a variety of physical health and mental health benefits. So if you
Mm.
had like 2 miles long, and just kind of like what Olmsted envisioned, this 2 mile long parkway, it would really benefit not only the physical health, the mental health, but the social health. I mean, imagine being able to just walk pleasantly down if there was a bridleway down the middle like they did in the original state. And then the connection, like people who lived on one side of Humboldt could actually go and say, "Oh, you're my neighbor on the other side." So that's social health. So there's many, many benefits. And so that's in essence kind of what East Side Parkway Coalition is fighting for, to have that full restoration. And there's a couple lawsuits that are pending that we're trying to like fight on the legal stance, but we also do a lot of social activism. So, reaching out to people, educating the people, because a lot of people didn't know exactly what DOT was proposing. They thought there was going to be a part one and then a part two. And we're like, no, there's no part two. This is it. Like what if they do this, this is all that there is going to be until probably maybe your grandchildren are like my age, which is a half a century. So you gotta deal with this for the next 100 years. So it's a matter of, no, don't like let them gaslight you saying, oh, this is going to be a part two. And then don't let them let you think that it's going to be this kind of like mimic of the green space. It's going to be an artificial type of mimicking because I mean, think about it, trees growing on top of cement covering of an expressway is not the same as trees just growing in the land or on earth. So um, that's in
So,
essence what the East Side Parkway Coalition is.
so Dr. Roberts, tell us what it looked like in Buffalo before Route 33, before the Kensington Expressway, and before the paving over the Skagakwada Parkway, which used to be another, that what was not just the Frederick Law Olmsted vision for Buffalo, but the reality of that up until these were built.
Yeah, so I mean, at one point, like Buffalo was really like one of like the 10th largest cities, like during like the latter half of like the 19th century. I mean, and rightly so, particularly we were like, a main central metropolis, not only for New York State, but for the whole country, because we had the Erie Canal, we had the industries of iron and steel. Like there was a lot that was really elevating our status as a city. And so we were like one of the 10th largest cities. And this was even before, Olmsted and Calvert Vaux designed the whole Buffalo Park system.
Mm.
But, you know, kind of like a lot of cities around that time who were developing in the second half of like the 19th century, particularly on the eastern um, east side of the country. Um, they were all kind of like trying to court Olmsted because he had just unveiled Central Park and everyone was thinking, oh my goodness, this is the best thing ever. This is just gorgeous. And so a lot of cities wanted their own individual Central Park. They're like, come to my city, come do a Central Park here. And a, kind of some of the not just nudging with his partner Calvert Vaux. He told Frederick, he was like, look, you need to check out Buffalo. Come check out Buffalo, because it'd probably be a great city for like the next project, the next kind of like, Central Park. So he was about 10 years after the unveiling of Central Park, Frederick Law Olmsted was just kind of doing things throughout the country. He did some visits down south. He wanted to look at the conditions or before shortly after emancipation, but conditions of like during sharecropping. He just was like he was an explorer, so to speak, and he just kind of wanted to look at some of those human conditions. Um, And so he was on his way back to New York City and he stopped over in Buffalo. And of course, you know, the city planners of Buffalo, they just laid out the red carpet. They had already kind of like scouted different locations. They're like, this would be a great place for the park. This would be a great place for the park. This would be a great place for the park. But Frederick Law Olmsted was like really just impressed with the design of the city, particularly how it had this radial design, not too dissimilar from Washington, D.C., which makes sense because the same brother, a brother who designed uh, Andrew Ellicott, who designed D.C., then his brother Joseph, his younger brother designed Buffalo, and it had that same kind of like radial kind of grid design. And he liked that because it was like kind of like anchored by the water to the west. So you had your river and you had your lake. And so then from there, it offshoot with this beautiful grid design. And he really just loved that. And so he was like, you know what, you guys don't need just one park. I think we should do like a park within a park, like this kind of mixed use park system that would link all of the parks together. So like it's almost in essence, you would never leave the park. His vision was you would go from what they were calling the park, which is now our Delaware Park, and you would walk that and you would walk that from a parkway to go to the next park, which they called the parade, which is now MLK Park. And then you would walk that, like you would walk like what was called like some cities have, including Buffalo, called it the Emerald Necklace. Hence, that's the moniker I'm using for my book. So he
Mm.
literally had this kind of greenery of a necklace, and he wanted to interlace that throughout the whole city. And so, pretty much between like the last couple of decades, like 1868 to 18 like 70s or something, they kind of planned this park system, and it really was wonderful because it was able to use some of the existing elements. So like you already had like this great meadow area that was going on in what was going to be called Delaware Park eventually. So he was able to kind of use that, and also because they were still kind of in this kind of viewpoint of like you need to have areas that you could do like, you know, military drills. So that's where they use like the MLK Park for like drills. But he also wanted to have like, you know, like a parade for like some children's pleasures. And it changed over time, particularly when some of his sons came and did some other like tweaking and development. But along with that, you know, you had Buffalo continuing to grow as a city, but also Buffalo was becoming a magnet for millions of Black Americans who were making their way up from the South up to a variety of cities up north. Detroit, we all know about, you know, they were drawn for the automotive industry, Chicago for a variety of things. Chicago was like just a mecca. You had everybody coming, you know, whether they were going to be like Mahalia, do hair, do gospel music. Everybody was doing a little bit at Chicago. And then everyone knows about the Harlem Renaissance. But Buffalo was in there too, you know, and a lot of Black folks were coming to Buffalo. And the population of the Black population of Buffalo, like it like increased like about like over 100%, like almost 150% between like 1915, like so there's like two waves of that Great Migration, like roughly 1910, 1915 to about the 40s. And then the second wave is like from the 40s to 70s. If you look at those dates, they kind of parallel to the dates of World War One, World War Two. I have to be very deliberate in how I say that because there's the double W's. But in any case, they parallel those dates. And so a lot of times Black folks were coming to come find jobs
Mm.
because what happens in the wars, a lot of the white men were pulled or plucked out of their jobs because they had to go, you know, to the war. Now you had some Black servicemen and men, not women, men specifically, sometimes women, but in any case, they were coming to fill those jobs that were getting vacant because a lot of the white men were going to go be servicemen. So you had like in that first wave, like almost 150% increase in the Black population of Buffalo. Like like if you just see that visually, it's probably like almost leaving the United States and then going to Africa, and all of a sudden you see Black people all around. Um, and then during the second wave, it doubled again, but about 100%. So when they were coming, they were like, well, where are we going to live? Now you have to think about a lot of things that were oft also shifting in terms of you already had existing immigrant populations. So like, for example, the fruit belt, there was already existing German population who actually were leaving because of some of the persecution in Germany, but they were living there, and which is why you had a lot of like fruit trees and fruit orchids, hence well, the fruit belt moniker came when the black people moved in. But in any case, you had these cherry trees, all these like orchids. And so they started to move, and then when they moved, some black people came in. So you saw all these shiftings in terms of these racial ethnic groups of how they migrated throughout the city. And a lot of that to me was catalyzed by racialized housing and planning practices. At one point we were much more integrated when we were looked at as just like working class versus non-working class, when that was like the dividing part of just the inhabitants of Buffalo. But when race started to come into it and it started to become like, okay, well, black and non-white, and then everybody else who's colored. Then you started to see shifts, and then you started to have people think, okay, well, if I'm living next to a black person, if I'm living next to a Polish or Irish person, are my property values going to go? You started to have all of these aspects, and it was like this kind of like perfect storm, whether it was racial covenants. You had racial covenants everywhere from Orchard Park, Amherst, within the city, these racial covenants that basically said to white folks, basically, if you buy this property, um, you can't sell it to anybody who is not white. The only non-white person who can come in this property is if you have like a domestic. So a maid, they can live on the residence, but you cannot. So these were like just actual contractual obligations they had to fulfill if they were to sell their property again. So these racial covenants were just all peppered throughout the Buffalo Niagara area. And so in essence, with that, and then also you go back even to much further back in the 30s with the baseline of redlining. If you have all of these things going on, you end up with this very segregated city of where you had almost the majority of Black people living on the east side. And on the east side was where you had Humboldt Parkway. Now, mind you, when the original Buffalo plan or parks was set, that area was a heavily Jewish population. And you had this beautiful like design coupled along these kind of like parkways, specifically Humboldt, where you had like these beautiful Victorian homes. You had some churches, but you had a lot of synagogues because it was in community centers because it was a predominantly Jewish area. But when folks over there started to get wind, like, wait a minute, I think they might be building a highway. They were like, I'm going to leave. And then those homes became available for purchase, which were they still are gorgeous. Even in the demise of all of the issues that have come, like the pollutants from the expressway, you still see that beautiful architecture. But in any case, when the Jewish families started to leave, you started to see some Black families say, oh, this is my opportunity to buy these beautiful homes. And this is a beautiful area that got this beautiful parkway that's just right in my front yard. So they started to come in. And so when they came in was right when the point when they started to say, okay, yeah, we're going to basically put in the 33 right here. Yep, this is going to be perfect. And at this point, you had areas that were now predominantly Black on the east side, such as Hamlin Park, and these very, American middle class communities, Black American middle class communities, that were really, I think, in many ways, just living their best lives because they had their community, they had this beautiful oasis of a green space. And it was kind of a nice way where they could kind of be separate from a lot of the still social and racial injustices they face on a day to day, but to have this beautiful community which they didn't know was pretty much imminent to be destroyed with the next 25 years of construction of the Kensington Expressway.
So
So that's
Dr. Roberts,
kind of it
can
in a
I,
nutshell.
Dr. Roberts, can I share the photo from your article that shows the before and after?
Oh, yeah, yeah, please do.
So for those of you who, so this is, let's see if I get it up here. Um, this is a photo from Dr. Roberts' article showing the Humboldt Parkway prior to its destruction with snow and trees, and then the Kensington afterwards.
Right.
And uh, and you have a red box around the same church
Yes, so you
to
can or
show.
Mm-hmm.
to show exactly what was lost. And
Exactly.
and one of the so I want to give Reverend Hughes a chance to comment in a sec. I just want to let Reverend Hughes know that the book that he recommended for this week is an excellent. It's called City Limits, and the the history that the author Megan Kimball chronicles is exactly what happens here in Buffalo, only she chronicles it in places like New York City, where they put in the Triborough Bridge, and the Triborough Bridge immediately increases traffic for the
Mm-hmm.
entirety of the region. It never decreases traffic. And that's in 1937, 1938. FDR is there at the with Robert Moses when it's opened, and it was supposed to alleviate traffic on the Midtown Bridge, the Queensboro Bridge, and it never did.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same thing happens in Houston and in Dallas, and Megan Kimball covers those in great detail. But from the 1940s on, it was understood that adding lanes, adding throughways into and out of cities does not ever decrease traffic. It only increases traffic. So
Mm-hmm.
that by the time, so we're talking the Kensington is built in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I I officiated at the funeral, may his memory be for a blessing of a Jewish person who ran for mayor on an anti-busing ticket in the early 70s. But prior to that, Michael Wolfgang. But prior to that, his he had worked out the eminent domain deal that allowed the Kensington to go through a Catholic cemetery, which it still does today, right? If you go to Kensington and Harlem, uh, that's the 33 bisects a cemetery. And Mr. Wolfgang managed to work out the deal with the Catholic Church to relocate the nuns' graves that would have been underneath the expressway to another location so that the expressway could go through. This is the type of stuff that was done. And that's not even talking about the destruction of that neighborhood around
Mm-hmm.
the Kensington, the Humboldt intersection in particular, right? That Humboldt Parkway intersection at the Humboldt and the Kensington, and where the Skirjakwata comes in today, 198 comes in today.
Right. Exactly.
So we have kept Reverend Hughes quiet for almost half an hour, and this is maybe a record.
Unheard of. No, I'm just listening and I'm learning, and it's interesting that we're talking about, how so-called progression in American cities were always at the expense of black and brown people. I'm in Atlanta. This is my hometown, and we have the same story here. There are several communities within the city that were decimated when they decided to build through highways to cut traffic. Even now, when you go downtown in Atlanta, there's two interstates that bisect the city, north and south, and literally smack dab downtown is Grady Hospital, one of the largest hospitals in the country. You know, half the people born in Atlanta were born at Grady Hospital, and because it is the biggest hospital, it serves just about everybody, mostly black and brown people. And it's almost impossible to get there by car because they have made it, the way they engineered the roads and the highways, it's, even the ambulances have difficulty getting into the hospital. And we've often questioned that. Well, why is it so difficult for us to get medical attention? So, and it's because we would say that it's by design. They designed it that way so that we would have difficulty getting access to proper medical attention at the big hospital. So, it's the same story.
Wow, and Dr. Roberts just put, "What does a traffic jam in Atlanta have to do with segregation?" Quite a lot. The
Yeah.
Kevin Cruz article
Well,
from
thank you, sir.
2019.
Great. Yeah, I heard of
Mm-hmm.
it. I never got to read it. Thanks.
Kevin Cruz, by the way, if you haven't read his work before, he has another amazing book called One Nation Under God,
Mhm.
How Corporate America Invented Christian America.
Oh, okay.
So which is eye-opening and astounding, and maybe something that we throw in the future.
And relevant to today.
So
Oh,
very relevant. So very relevant.
well, yes, because basically Billy Graham was tasked by a bunch of corporate leaders in the 1930s and 1940s to create a libertarian Christianity to counter the social, quote unquote, socialism of FDR. So that's which eventually led to the inclusion of One Nation Under God into the Pledge of Allegiance, which didn't start with any reference to religion. Anyway, coming back to our topic at hand, so one of the things, so both we've all three of us grew up in three cities that were distinctly transformed by the imposition of highways that were not meant to be used as intra-city transportation. The interstate highway system was specifically designed to be interstate, to take people between cities and states, not to take people from the suburbs into the city. That was and Megan Kimball chronicles how Eisenhower was surprised by its use for this, because Eisenhower's original intent was for military readiness, for
Right.
supply lines,
Mhm.
because he had seen how terrible the roads were in the 1940s in the United States and how long it took him to drive cross country. So all three of us come from three different urban areas where there is a highway on the east side of Manhattan named for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the FDR Drive, which took away a huge amount of what would be high-end waterfront property for the sake of a highway. And now we are in a time where highways are finally being seen as the blight upon the cities that they are. And so we are not far from Rochester, where they are in the process of continuing to take down an inner loop. So, Dr. Roberts, what does a potential solution look like? Instead of, I think part of our problem right now is that we in Buffalo are in the thrall of the idea that maybe Governor Hochul has sold us on, that putting the Kensington Parkway underground could be a reemergence for that neighborhood, like putting the highway in Boston underground, even though the situations are not analogous at all. They're not remotely alike. Whereas maybe we ought to be taking the Rochester example to heart, and or the San Francisco example, the taking down of the Embarcadero, and saying, okay, highways through our cities do not serve us. So what's the alternative? What happens if, first of all, it's possible to get rid of infrastructure? So we have to overcome this idea that we can't do it. And then we have to think about what we put in its place, because just getting rid of it is not enough. So Dr. Roberts, knowing what you know, and with Reverend Hughes in reserve for some comments about skepticism about what we might be able to do, because I know he's got some skepticism there. What's the vision for, let's call it a filled-in Kensington and a de-highwayed Skagit?
I think it's simple as what you said. You feel it, you phase in the filling in terms of the way we saw how Rochester, like I was there earlier, May, June, maybe it was, and you almost forget that where you're standing where you would have been standing in the middle of a highway. Now, yes, the streets seem extra wide, but I mean, that's only one, to me, like one little side effect. because you now have this at-grade road where you can now have people who can like actually walk along businesses, walk along where you would have some, residential housing. And I'll come back to that because when you're doing this, you also have to be very cognizant. My colleague put out this report to have yesterday to have measures put in place to prevent green gentrification. But I think you can do the same thing as to take out the green. You can say other impetus for gentrification, but it's the same kind of system. But you want to also have that in place to make sure that what you do when you are filling it in, and it's now like maybe you build these new type of housing, that you make sure that you're not going to displace the existing businesses and existing residents. But in any case, this is something that it's half the cost for what they're proposing. And you have a perfect blueprint, just not even 60 miles away, in Rochester, showing how you fill in the highway and you put it at grade so that now you can just have, some maybe like single lane one-way streets on either side, and then you just put that green space down the middle, very similar to how it used to be. And people are like, well, where will all that traffic go? Well, as you recall, I said the population is cut in half, so that will be able to those cars and vehicles will be able to be managed on the existing arterial roads that are parallel to Main Street, Genesee, Broadway, all these other streets that are like, you go down there and there's like nobody over there. And then what will happen is those streets will now start to have driving traffic, like just regular driving traffic and walk-up traffic. And what will that do? That will have invigorate some businesses. Because that's another reason why people don't want to have business over there. Because like no one comes over here. Why? Because they get on the expressway. No one comes down those streets. But now if you have cars redirected down those arterial roads, you'll be able to accommodate the traffic. And then the extra money, like I said, to fill it in is only about half the cost of this proposed tunnel. You could actually have some light rail. So people who are like, well, I don't even want to drive, I'll take the light rail. All these other alternatives that have this kind of very much more smart growth approach to how we approach our transit is one of the things that I think that we are a great candidate for. I had lived in Atlanta for 2 years, so I empathize with you, Pastor Hughes, about the traffic. And I not only was only there 2 years, but I felt the resistance in terms of this, you're not going to have anything more than murder. Like they want to just keep, it's a poster child for sprawl. They will just keep going out, and people really love their cars there. I'm not to say people in Buffalo don't love it, but people love their cars, and they're like, I'm okay with commuting from Gwinnett or Cobb County for 2.5 hours to get like 5 I'm okay with that. Like that's what they're at peace with. Now, mind you, there's a lot of other racist undercurrent to that. Historically, probably a little residue of that today. But in any case, I feel like Buffalo is a wonderful place where we could actually be open to having this highway removed and also have new light rail lines come in. One light rail line that goes maybe all the way out to the airport. I know they're supposed to be having a light rail line coming down Bailey. All these other options, to have light rail lines where people can be like, you know what? I don't have to use my car. And actually it's even better for the air quality. So that's how I propose that. And I make it sound like it's very simplistic. Conceptually, it can be simplistic. Yes, you'd have to do some very much specific engineering to do this, but I feel like it's not like something that you have to imagine, like what would it be like? You go down the street to your colleagues in Rochester and be like, how did you guys do it? And you got the perfect blueprint like that. We're literally sister cities.
Thank you,
Question
Dr.
is, why
Roberts.
don't they? And why is it such a fight? Why is it such a struggle for us to make these things happen? Even though we've proven that the cost is not as much, not as great as their original plan. Why are we still fighting this?
I think part of it is, so you had a relationship of New York State DOT that was developed with some of, I call them the early activists or against the highways, Rock. And I think Rock made some really great inroads. I mean, what they have been able to do over the past decades, or since the 90s, I think when they originated, has been, outstanding. And I think you have people who are part of Rock who think, okay, look, we got to win, and they're going to do something. But the thing about it is they have to do something. Like the retaining walls are crumbling. Like they are obligated to do something. So that in essence is not necessarily a true win. It's about what kind of something they're going to do. And to think about what Rock's early vision was, they wanted a full restoration of the Parkway. And I always say, like, when you learn negotiating 101, you ask for more than what you want.
Right.
Because they're going to come back and say, well, no, I can only give you this. So you
Yeah.
have your bottom line, like when you're going back with a house, you don't say offer like, what you want to end at, you go beyond that. And I feel like with DOT, you go for the moon, and you can sweeten that deal to show that, look, it's going to be cheaper for you. You guys are going to look like you're going to really be falling in line with the the former Biden-Harris reconnecting the communities protocol. Like these are things that you could really look great as politicians, as civils, all this aspects. And so the resistance, I feel like it's a combination of people thinking, okay, well, we finally got something. If we keep pushing harder, we're not gonna get anything. No, you have to get something because the highway is crumbling. So they have to do something. So you will get something. And also the kind of fear of like, well, they'll take the money back. Well, no, they have to do something. So I think there's a little bit of gaslighting that's been done by some of the government, it's particularly like DOT. And I think there's a little bit of misinformation that's going on. So you have that kind of mixture going on. And I think people are thinking that this is it. So I don't want to rock the boat anymore. Where I feel like you can always rock the boat. You keep pushing and pushing and pushing, because I always want to say I want to be on not necessarily the right side of history, but I want to be on the side of history where I can sleep at night. And so I want to keep pushing and pushing for I know what is the best thing, not only for the East Side, because we keep saying this is like an East Side thing, for the whole city. Like imagine people on the West Side can walk from Bidwell, Lincoln, Chapin, then Delaware Park, and then Humboldt Park. They could do like, imagine how you could even restructure like the marathons that we do, like all these things. So it's not just an East Side thing, it would be an asset for the whole entire city. So Pastor, I feel like there's something that I might be missing because I'm not in all the closed doors, but from what I can see, I feel like the solution is like right in front of us. And so I'm going to keep pushing and pushing for the solution that is most optimal for not only East Side residents who have had the burden of having to live near this expressway for generations, but also the solution for the entire city.
Right.
So I think the voice that hasn't been heard. So Dr. Gabriel Atchison and I have had a number of conversations, and every time I express optimism about something with the East Side Parkway, she says, I don't get it. She says, I'm sorry, I don't believe in it. I think as an African-American who's come into town from elsewhere, I have no optimism about Buffalo actually doing the right thing here. And I think it's an important voice to enter into this conversation that Buffalo's provincialism, Buffalo, and let's talk about the attempt, the overall repeated failed attempts to solve Main Street, right? Main Street down the center of Buffalo was part of the white flight problem. And how was it solved? It was solved by a light rail system. And then what did they do? They shut down traffic on Main Street where the light rail was above ground and ruined businesses there. Then they
Mm.
thought, okay, we'll make more parking structures and build a movie theater downtown on here so that people could get here. That didn't work. Those Main Street businesses never came back. And it took them decades to listen, not to African Americans, but to reasonable urban planners saying, hey, wait a second, Main Street is good because people can drive to those businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Not people from the suburbs, but people from the city. So
Yeah.
we have a historic, a decades long misguided approach to city planning here that has over and over again depleted businesses and depleted the residential vibrant nature of the downtown at the expense of far-flung suburbs that are the product of a racist culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said it right there. And you say, city planning is not necessarily misguided; it's just racist, right? So, and again, I haven't lived in Buffalo, but for about 3 years. But like I said, I see the parallels. The same thing happens in my hometown, Atlanta. The same thing was happening in Fort Lauderdale, where I spent 3 years prior to coming to Buffalo. It's the same pattern. It's the same pattern. And it's always at the expense of Black and brown people. And when you talk about when you advocate for the kind of change that alleviates the problems of the broader city, it's never considered viable because they just don't want it to benefit Black and brown people. And it was actually said in Florida. I remember being in a meeting with city planners, with neighborhood planning units, and the community was saying, hey, we've been here for several decades. We've invested in this community. Most of us own our homes. We don't want to sell out. We don't want to turn it into Airbnb. We don't want to renovate. We don't want to flip. We just want to keep our property. We want to keep our homes. Why would you want to build? They were building. It wasn't a highway, but it was some kind of. They wanted to tear down some homes and build a parking area because there was a lot of overflow from the urban area in Fort Lauderdale. And they kept saying, we don't need that here. There are other options. And they would not entertain those other options, specifically because those other options allowed for a better and easier access for brown and Black people to get in and out of the city. And they just didn't want it. And they were coming up with all kinds of terms and words, and they were all dog whistles. And I was sitting in the meeting thinking, well, you just say you don't want Black people to come downtown. Just say that, because these terms that they were coming up with were ridiculous. They were saying things like, we don't want the criminal element. The criminal element. What are you talking about, criminal element? What does that even mean? How are you making a term about criminal element when you're talking about people coming out of one community into another? What makes it a criminal element? And same thing that happened in Atlanta, even my community, same thing. So I feel like we're dealing with a situation where if it benefits Black and brown people, it's just not going to happen. And I kind of had that same, I don't want to say defeatist attitude, but at the same time, it's realist, right? It's the pushback, because the proof is there. Like, hey, here's a solution that's beneficial for everybody. Why wouldn't you entertain that?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? If
Mm-hmm.
this is not a Black issue, it's not a problem for just Black and brown people. This is a city problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an option that helps the entire city, but you don't want to entertain it because of a certain group of people who just might get a little bit more than they're getting already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it
Well,
goes back to that Heather McGee. You mentioned, you brought up Heather McGee, Rabbi Jonathan, earlier when you were talking about the faulty of the zero-sum argument. So that's kind of similar to what you were alluding to, Pastor.
Right.
right. And of course, Dr. Roberts, you documented on the blue space racism stuff, which is as soon, if as pools progressed as public resources and they ceased to be gender segregated, then the fear of having Black men and white women in the pool at the same time created racial segregation,
Yeah.
and so all of these things, the history of public resources in this country could really be summed up as this idea as I'm not going to share it with those people, whomever those people are. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be against it, even if it benefits me, if it's also going to benefit basically somebody black or brown, or somebody from another country, or somebody who doesn't look like me, or somebody who doesn't practice the right religion, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So with that positive note, I'm going to invite John Dobbles and Nanette Massey are on with us, and I would like to allow them, if they want, to unmute themselves and start their video if they'd like to join in and ask a question or make some comments, because we've got 10 minutes and I've got some opportunities to preview what we're talking about next as well, because between Reverend Hughes and Dr. Gabriel Atchison, we've come up with a topic, a current events topic for next time. Hello, John. Long time no see.
Hello, Jonathan. So this is a fascinating conversation. I spent a bit of a time in Detroit also, as well as New York. And, the problems seem to repeat themselves. Another way of looking, I mean, as you listen to this and you got this whole litany of problems, and then I have a project I'm on. You say, all right, you got all these problems, and I know we're all trying to do the same thing, but how do you solve it? And so the project right now, and I think I might have mentioned this, but it's how do you decarbonize MIT's campus? And so, there's a lot of theories behind that, but there's a group of MIT alumni, faculty, and students, which is a fascinating combination, of getting together to figure out a practical plan to make that happen. And when can you make it happen? And that's the target is by 2035. And so there's a couple of people on the group, why do we have this timeline? Why do we have this? Why do we have that? And the point is, trying to relate it to what we've talked about, is trying to get sort of a multidisciplined and multi-perspective group, because the students, as you well know, are from all over the world now. They're not just the typical white bread students that we used to have. And so we look at this and say, all right, here's the timeline, here's what people need to do, and here's how to get it done. And so maybe in a very simplistic way, maybe it's the same kind of thing in Buffalo. Is there somebody that's laid out a plan and said, okay, here's where we want to be, here's the timeline, and how do we get it done?
Well, our challenge here in Buffalo, John, and project management is the least of our problems. So why is there an East Side Parkway Coalition? There's an East Side Parkway Coalition because our elected officials, two of our elected officials, leaders in the city, have come out very much for this tunnel project. And so the East Side Parkway Coalition has said, wait a second, you haven't done an environmental study on this, because they haven't. You were just tapping into the enthusiasm of getting highway money from the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which had designated a whole bunch of infrastructure funding from the federal government, and connected with the governor and said, let's do this. There is no good socioeconomic reason, no benefit to putting this roadway underground. There's none of the outcomes they want are, in fact, the best potential outcomes from a project for this. And nonetheless, our mayor and one of our local legislative leaders got behind it 100% until they weren't behind it, and even went so far as to thank you, Dr. Roberts, a similar situation in the Black Bottom neighborhood of Detroit. Even went so far, so I wanted to start going to houses of worship, and I was told to organize on behalf of a better solution for the Kensington. And I was told that some of those churches were already told that their city-supported programs would be in jeopardy if they came out against the project.
Wow.
Mm,
Yeah, well, I mean, just the MIT project had a completely different track. And
Mm.
so in terms of people wanting to do one thing and we're on, about 180 degrees and trying to turn that around has been a huge problem. And that's like a 1.5 to 2 year problem. So I get that part. But the penalty part is the tough one.
Right.
If you do this, we'll take this away. But
Nanette, did you have something to say? Because I heard you groan on that one.
Yeah, just wow, just the brazenness. Just I guess I'm a little naive to be so shocked, but I am. I
Well,
wanted to ask, go
you're an
ahead, go ahead.
optimist, so you're an optimist, Nanette, and
Yeah.
you wouldn't go out there and do what you do if you didn't believe it would have an impact. So anyway,
That's
what
true.
was your comment?
Well, I wanted to ask Pastor Hughes what part of Atlanta he's in.
Um, Actually, I'm in the west side. I'm on the west side. I'm in an
Okay.
Airbnb because I'm traveling with the whole
Okay.
thing. And my mama's
Yeah.
house is really big enough for all of us. So yeah, I'm on the west side.
Ah,
And you know what? It's so ironic, or serendipitous that I'm in an Airbnb in a neighborhood 15 years ago would have been a complete slump. And I remember it.
yeah.
And I remember when I came to this Airbnb, we checked in a couple of days ago, and I said, oh my gosh, this area used to be so run down. All of these houses have been renovated, they've been flipped. And so now you have all of this, it looks nice, okay? And I'm wondering, well, when did this happen? When did all of this happen? And what happened to all the other Black people that used to live here? Because I knew people that lived here. So anyway, this is all sort of tying in there. But yeah, I'm on the west side, near Hollowell Parkway, which used to
Okay.
be called Bankhead Highway, which was
Bankhead Highway, Bankhead Bounce. What?
yeah.
Yeah, I lived in Atlanta for 20 something years before I moved back here to Buffalo, right smack in the middle of the gentrification debate, and you know and found myself right in the middle of it. I inherited my grandparents' house, and my response to the whole gentrification thing was my initial response to the whole gentrification thing was the same as my initial response to the Highway 33 thing. I thought, well, why do we care about white people coming to buy these houses? If it ups the value, why is that bad? Now, now I have a whole different view of things, and as a result of listening to you guys, I have a whole lot to take in about the 33, because my initial response was, well, I like getting to the highway pretty quickly, what, and I'm not old enough to remember the parkway, specifically. Um, and you guys were talking about downtown. Geez, every time I go downtown, it's like crying over a lost boyfriend. I remember when downtown was vibrant, and my mother used to give us $100 and we say, go to AM&A's and get your school clothes, just get on the bus and go. And yeah, just ruined. I didn't realize there were other voices saying, no, this isn't a good idea. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. And the powers that be went ahead anyway. So that sounds like an omen, for what's happening with 33.
Well, hopefully it won't be. Hopefully, you know, better heads, sounder heads, more planful heads
Better
will
heads
prevail.
prevail.
Hopefully the reasons for doing things will come to light as we decide maybe we could get better outcomes. And I think the big message from Megan Kimball's book and from the Rochester Project and from other places is that infrastructure is not permanent. That we get to build things. And then
Mm.
one of the reasons, I was just listening to another book that we've suggested in this group before, called How to Hide an Empire. And there was in the late 19th century, the building of large buildings and redesign in urban settings was hamstrung by sort of the powers of the progressive era, which were, lots of political regulation and interest groups at loggerheads. And now, of course, we know that corporate money makes things happen very quickly. Federal money makes things happen very quickly, but we don't do well by it because we don't do stakeholder engagement. We don't do conversations like these where we actually engage with community members, with both the people who come up with a good idea and the people who the idea is going to serve, and everyone in between. And that's the way we end up with decent solutions. So speaking of what's next for us, so this will come as a surprise to Dr. Roberts, although I really invite you back for our next discussion. So I raised a question which I've wisely decided not to ambush Reverend Hughes with today. And the question is one that and the question is one that I mentioned to Dr. Gabriel Atchison, who's another participant in our call, who's going to come back in 2 weeks and help us look at it. And the question is one that I, as an outsider, don't feel like I have a right to ask, but here I am asking it anyway. With the ascension of Vice President Harris as the lead candidate for the Democratic ticket, what is the challenge or change or response from the African American, mostly male-led religious community, a community that has had its own grappling with patriarchy? And so this is, sticking my toe into a pool that I know nothing about, but have experienced, as an ally and accomplice, because I have been alongside Reverend Denise Walden Glenn and Whitney Walker, who are faith leaders in the African American community, as they have been sidelined and or abused by African American men male leaders in their community. So in anticipation of this potential question, we invited Dr. Atchison to join us in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from today is Wednesday, September, is it 7th, I think, Wednesday, September 7th. That's correct. And no, that's
It's
not
the
correct.
4th.
Wednesday, September 4th, right? My addition totally off. So Wednesday, September 4th will be our next meeting, and we're going to be talking about this question of what challenges, changes are there in sort of the African American feminist, even womanist world with regard to patriarchy and Kamala Harris's candidacy. Dr. Atchison responded immediately today with a couple of resources. I'm going to put them out as I select through them, but things like Eloquent Rage by Brittany Cooper, Morgan Jerkins is a scholar who's written something called a book called This Will Be My Undoing. Adrienne Marie Brown, whom I've actually read, is a African-American woman writer on something called Emergent Strategies, and Kelly Brown Douglas is another. So if you have suggestions on what specifically I ought to read in order to be a better facilitator for 2 weeks from now, feel free to let me know. But that's our topic, is really going to be what is the change in our culture in having an African-American woman lead the ticket for the Democratic Party. Because we saw something of change and backlash with Hillary Clinton leading the ticket in 2016. We obviously saw a huge amount of change and backlash with having an African-American president. And how is having a woman of color in the lead changing these things? So that's going to be our next sort of timely question. Any other thoughts? Reverend Hughes, Dr. Roberts, John, Nanette, before we sign off for today?
I have a question, because Nanette brought up the gentrification issue and sort of looking at it one way and then maybe a little bit later looking at it differently. when we moved to Boston, we ended up in an area that was an old row house, is what it was. It's a couple of blocks that would be torn down if they weren't renovated. And we happened to be the first tenants after they were renovated. And it was a mixed community, clearly gentrified, that area. It was in the Back Bay. And I don't know what it is now, but I know it's a lot higher end than what it was. And so you look at that, and it's sort of a two-edged sword, from an investor standpoint. Okay, we're going to go in and help renovate it. And then how do you keep some people in the neighborhood, or what's wrong with the mixed neighborhood now? I mean, it's sort of a culture on one hand. It's like, because it's nice, because Jonathan and I go through this. When you hang out, or when you were in Charlotte, I mean, hanging out at Bethel is, okay, you're around a bunch of Jews and you don't have, it's sort of a different thing. Blacks the same way. And cultures are, have their own sort of way of looking at things and operating and so forth. And you're very comfortable a lot of times in that environment. And yet at the same time, we're trying to become more integrated overall. So the gentrification issue is a real difficult one in terms of balancing it to maintain the old neighborhood and yet improve it.
So this is a huge topic.
Yes, it is. I was going to say, and then I'm thinking, should I say that? Because how much time do we?
Well, I was hoping for a 2-minute answer, but I know it's a big problem.
The quickest answer is read the chapter in the book on, that Dr. Roberts already put an article in the chat, a great gentrification article, and great parks should not uproot communities. Excellent. The book that we read for 2 sessions ago was something called Just Action, which is the what to do next about segregation book by Richard Rothstein and Leah Rothstein. They have a whole chapter on conscious conscious gentrification, effective gentrification. Also, an entire chapter on what it means to create real mixed income housing. That is mixed income housing with longevity, and that actually continues to serve a mixed income community. Because John, what you're talking about is absolutely real. We want people to feel at home among their neighbors, right? So people want to feel like they've got a neighborhood that's with enough of their people. But most Americans want to live in an integrated neighborhood where they have some of our people and some of people who are not, quote unquote, our people, because our bigger people is all of us. And it's very comfortable to be able to have a neighbor with whom I might be able to walk to synagogue, which I currently don't, on the one hand.
And that is the antithesis of gentrification, right? I think more to answer the question is that, the balance is understanding what the community wants. I think for me, from my experience, the most difficult aspect of gentrification is nothing we can do about it. It's done. People just come in, they do what they want to do, they know the right people, they get the right contract, and then all of a sudden your neighborhood is being taken from you. You had no input. Oh, well, we want to build this, we want to build that. Well, what about what we want? What about what we want? We are here. We live here. Okay, our community is our community. It may not look like your community, but it's our community. Why do they feel like they can just come to our community and do what they want to do in our community instead of asking what the community wants? Of course, we don't want crime in our community. We want more. We don't want food deserts, right? We want access to good food. We want access to healthcare. We want all these things as well. How come those things can't be addressed according to the needs of the community? And so that, to me, is a big thing, because it always comes from the top. We're going to build a school here. We don't want a school here. We don't want parking spaces here. We don't want these. We don't want a Walmart in our community. We don't want a CVS. We don't want these things. And so there's this animosity that happens between these developers and the community. And to me, that's one of the big aspects of gentrification that I'm really, getting kind of angry about it, because it happens everywhere. Not just one city, but it's all over. 2
Dr.
minutes.
Roberts, in addition to that article, will you tentatively agree to come back some point and we'll talk about better plans for gentrification?
Yes, I would love to come back. I definitely would love to come back.
Because I think,
Wednesday is my teaching day, but there might be some Wednesdays that I will still be able to join you.
well, this is, we can change our time too. So,
Oh,
so I want to, first of all, offer thanks to everybody who's here. Thank you, Nanette. Thank you, John, for sticking out with us. Thank you, Bob, for being here for a little while. I didn't think Bob found our topic all that interesting. Thank you most of all to Dr. Roberts for joining us. And thank you, Reverend Hughes, as always, for being my accomplice in attempting to find something better. And I wish everybody blessings of wholeness, blessings of health, blessings of finding better ways to do things that we thought couldn't be done before. As we head forward into a better future, may you enjoy the Democratic National Convention if that's your thing for watching. Certainly, it was very interesting to see crowded arenas in both Chicago and Detroit last night. So,
Mhm.
wishing all of you a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna
Thank you all. Thank you,
thank
Dr.
you.